Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session of SFOF Fiscal Focus. We're excited to have you joining us here today. We have another special treat where we're going to be visiting with one of our state auditors, the Kentucky auditor, Mike Harmon. Just want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and that it is available at sfof.com/events for you to watch down the road or share with any of your colleagues. Also, just a reminder that next Tuesday, we will be spotlighting Mississippi Treasurer David McRae, followed by Idaho Treasurer Julie Ellsworth. So don't miss those. It'll be a lot of fun. So I'm going to start just with a little bio from Auditor Harmon, and then we'll just dive right in. Mike Harmon was first elected in November 2015 as the 47th Auditor of Public Accounts for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. He was elected to a second term as auditor in November 2019. Mike previously served in the Kentucky House of Representatives for 13 years, representing the people of Boyle and Casey County, and previously Washington County in the 54th District. During his time in public service, Auditor Harmon has always promoted common sense solutions to make life better for the people of Kentucky by supporting good public policy to protect and preserve those taxpayer dollars. Mike brings those same values along with his desire to make government more transparent to his role as auditor. His motto, follow the data, has become synonymous with the role of the auditor's office. Under his leadership, the auditor's office has completed high-profile audits and examinations of entities and programs such as the Commonwealth's public retirement systems, the Administrative Office of the Courts, Kentucky Wired, the University of Louisville Foundation, the Kentucky Law Enforcement Foundation Program Fund, and many others. His administration has also supported legislation to strengthen city audit requirements, improve transparency of area development districts, and reduce the cost of audits for county officials. Mike is a graduate of Eastern Kentucky University with degrees in math, statistics, and theater, and was valedictorian of his Boyle County High School class. Mike also serves as a deacon and church moderator at Junction City First Baptist Church. Despite all these accomplishments, Mike is most proud of being married to his wife, Lynn, for more than 30 years and raising their two daughters, Tori and Lizzie. Mike is also a proud grandfather to his grandsons, Aiden and Silas. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Auditor Mike Harmon.
Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing?
We are good. Thanks so much for your time today, and thanks again for your willingness to serve the people of Kentucky. Why don't we start by just giving us a little bit of background of what made you decide to run for Kentucky Auditor?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I served 13 years in the Kentucky General Assembly prior to being elected auditor. And as it turned out, of course, I had ran for lieutenant governor with a fellow by the name of Phil Moffitt. We were running on slates at that time back in 2011. We fell a little short in the primary. And so I was praying, to be honest with you, I had thought I might run for Secretary of State only because I had served on elections, constitutional amendments, intergovernmental affairs in the House for 13 years, but prayed about it, felt like God closed that door. A couple of things happened, prayed about the fact running for auditor, felt like that door opened and stepped through. And but it just felt like, it was important for our state to make sure that we have a good financials for the state, making sure that people were efficient, effective, and ethical. And so I took that challenge on. I tell people this, it was kind of an interesting race back in 2015 because actually I only had 45,000 against the incumbent at the time who had 800,000. But we were blessed and was able to get elected. So
that's fantastic. I know, we have this saying that if you've seen one state treasurer's office, you've seen one state treasurer's office. I've learned over time that the same is for state auditors as well, in that every state auditor's office has different statutory requirements, different purviews. Why don't you talk a little bit about what your office does do as auditor?
Sure. We basically are responsible for making sure that, as I said, the state's efficient, effective, and ethical. But some of the things that we do, we do audits of fiscal courts, basically our counties, fiscal courts, sheriffs, county clerks. We also do what's known as the statewide single audit of Kentucky, which is just looking at the financial statements. We just recently released 2 volumes of that. Volume 1, which looked at the financial statements and controls, and volume 2, which looked more at the financial or federal compliance. And those are, as I jokingly say, those are kind of like the fellow that had been at the corduroy pillow. They've been making a whole lot of headlines here lately, specifically at the Office of Unemployment Insurance, only because we've had a lot of problems, as states have as well.
So you have, I know as we've watched your office over the last several years, you've had a few audits that have like you just mentioned, the one for the entire state, but that have made some headlines,
Yes.
that have definitely brought some transparency to some places that maybe people kind of got a little relaxed and didn't think that anybody would be watching what they were doing. So why don't you talk about a few of those that really have raised some eyebrows and brought that good transparency and accountability back to state government?
Well, in addition to what our typical stuff is, our statutorily required audits, financial statement audits, we also do what's known as special exams. And when we do the special exams, we have a little more leeway in looking and digging a little bit more deeper. And some of those that we did, one of the very first ones we did right out of the block, I had just been elected, but had not actually been sworn in yet. And I was going back over to the Capitol, and one of my friends, he was actually the opposite political persuasion, but one of my friends approached me that I'd served with the House, and he was really angry. At first, I thought maybe he was angry at me, but he approached me and he said, he had wanted this fund, the Kentucky Law Enforcement Program Fund, the CLEP funds, dollars audited for years. The previous auditor wouldn't do it. Leadership in the House, Democrat leadership in the House wouldn't do it. And he asked me if I would do it. I asked him to explain it to me. It was about $100 million a year in taxpayer funds coming from taxes, and he wanted us to audit. So I took a look at it, and we made a decision to audit it. And we had, some interesting findings. They were kind of, one of the ones was they were using actually my alma mater to employ some of them to where they'd get the best of both worlds. They wanted the benefits of being a state employee, but they also they wanted the benefits salary wise of being an employee of the college, but they wanted the benefits of the compensatory time of the state. And so they were doing some off book stuff on that, among other things. And we also showed where that fund had been swept millions and millions of dollars. And of course, we were aware that it was going on, but been swept, that really those funds are supposed to go specifically towards the education of law enforcement, and also in the other case serve in the fire fund. So that was one. Probably the other one that we had many, but one of them we had a huge number looked at is AOC, which is the Administrative Office of the Courts here in Kentucky. They had never, of course, they had been reorganized back in the 70s when we did some of the stuff on our Constitution, but they had not been audited at all. And so I was the very first auditor in our state to audit them. And there were a lot of findings. We looked, specifically at some issues in regards to the sale of surplus property. But the thing that probably I got dinged the most about, we were testifying before a committee, and we were talking about the fact that the Chief Justice's wife had asked his assistant to purchase about $400 worth of personally engraved mint julep cups for a conference that they were having. And of course, we had to point that out. That was one of our findings. And I know that seems insignificant, but I told them the same as I tell everybody else. We write up sheriffs and county clerks and other individuals for smaller amounts, $25, $30, for using public funds for what's deemed as a personal use and not consistent with our laws and our statutes. And so if I'm going to do that, I'm going to do it for the greatest and the smallest. One of the other ones we did was Kentucky Wired. Kentucky Wired was a big project for the state to try to, and it was the first time in the state that we were looking at a huge public-private partnership prior to the P3 legislation that was passed in the General Assembly. And the original concept was to have all through the state, basically high-speed internet line. But it wasn't going to do the final mile. It was just, go through the state. So cover every county. And there was some federal funds available, and then also the General Assembly assigned 30 million. But the idea of a public-private partnership is the private partnerships takes on more of the risk, so they have an opportunity for more reward. But what we found out was that our former governor, Steve Beshear, prior to leaving, his finance secretary signed off on a form that basically flipped the script on the Kentucky taxpayers and took us basically from an obligation of about 30 million on those bonds to a 1.5 billion, it's big with a B. And really you hear some news about them getting some of it done, but it's struggling. And when we had talked to some of the people that when they were doing it, we had some like counties tell us, we already had the lines, they could have just connected into it. But instead they chose, because there wasn't any risk to them anymore, just to do a line right around it. So, some of the things like that, that's, specifically, what we do. We do about 600 audits per year, stay busy. Given my legislative background, we've been very active in trying to pass legislation to help governments be efficient, effective, and ethical. I was looking today, I think over the last 5.5 years, we've supported about 12 different pieces of legislation over the years that have been able to pass. And we've been very successful in getting legislation to pass. Now, I also jokingly say that, I know my colleague, the treasurer, Alice Ball, always talks about being the watchdog. And so I always say that, well, she's the watchdog on the front end. The auditor is the watchdog on the back end. So together we got your dogs covered. So very diligently towards
One question I have is on some of the federal stimulus money that's coming to the state. Will you also have an opportunity to kind of audit that? Will that be treated differently than the audits that your office does now? Will you be able to track and see that money was spent in the ways that your governor or legislature decides to spend that, so that the public knows that there's some accountability there?
Yeah, we've been very active with both CARES and ARPA when the monies came through. Especially CARES, when it first came out, there was very little guidance. And so we assigned staff to very quickly kind of monitor the ever-changing guidance. We work with what we call our Department of Local Government. We also work with CACO, which is our Kentucky counties, and just trying to do that. The other thing we did is we got in, we did some training. There are certain basic guidelines always apply and are always good to do. Standard controls are always good. Basically, counties and cities have to fill out. Now, we typically just audit counties. With cities, if we're auditing them, it's more of a special exam, and we can do that. But we encourage them to follow the normal guidelines for the CFA as well. As anytime that you have more, as a county has or a city has more than $750,000 in federal funds, they're supposed to have not just a normal audit, but a single audit. And so we encourage them to follow those guidelines, and we've been working with them. And even with the ARPA money, it's been changing as well. But we are very active in that regards.
So you said you do over 600 audits. Your office does.
Per
how
year,
many, a year. How many staff do you have, full-time staff, to do that?
It varies. Right now, we're running about 125 or so. We've had as many as 135. Okay. 6. That's some of the struggles we face that maybe some of our other auditing and maybe even the treasurer have faced in regards that we hire a lot of people, we train a lot of people, and then sometimes they get snatched away either to other government or the private sector. So sometimes it's a little more difficult for us to compete with the private sector. Where we are able to compete a little bit better is, more people can have more of a family life when it comes to the hours that they work. I jokingly say, this was about an attorney, not about a CPA, but I've heard similar about CPAs. I had an attorney friend one time said, yeah, she was on track to be partner at a big law firm. And she said she decided to go part-time so she could spend some more time with her family. And I said, well, what's part-time at your law firm? And she said 45 hours. So 45 hours was part-time at 13.
Yikes.
So
burn and turn.
yes.
Well, why don't you take a minute to introduce us? I know you have several of your staff members on the call. Do you want to introduce them and kind of do a little rundown of what each role is responsible for in your office?
Sure. My chief of staff is Sarah Beth Gregory. She has been with me from day one. She started out as my general counsel. And when my previous chief of staff left unexpectedly, she received a field promotion to chief of staff, and she has done it quite greatly. Do you want to say anything, Sarah Beth? Or
Just say hello to everyone. See if you've got speaker view on. My face will pop up this way. Great to see everyone. We love being a part of this group, and just look forward to continued partnership with SFOF, and love the information sharing with all of you in this group.
Thank you, Sarah Beth. And then John Gray, who's on with us, is my general counsel. He's been with us for a little while, and he's
the one counting the bourbon barrels.
Yes, he's counting the bourbon barrels. And as you can see, he's really great. He's a great attorney. And but no, I've known John for a long time. John actually, just prior to this, worked in the Justice Cabinet for the previous governor. And then prior to that, he had spent many years in LRC, the Legislative Research Commission, bill drafting. He'd even worked on some bill drafts for me when I was in the House. So he does an exceptional job, and we appreciate all his hard work. John, did you have anything you wanted to say? Or
good morning, everybody. Keep an eye out for the double oaked and the double oaked coming from Woodford. It's like 3 miles from my house, so I thought that'd be a good background.
There you go.
We're all big Woodford Reserve fans here at SFOF.
And also with me today, he's actually in the same room as I am. We are off site today because we're as soon as we're done here, I'm speaking to a Rotary group. But Michael Goins, my communications director. Michael, did you want to say anything? Or
Well, just that I'm the one responsible for bringing publicity to the office. And so I'm surprised the auditor didn't tell his joke that he says, lately our office has been like the guy that makes corduroy pillows. We keep making headlines. Did you tell that one? Okay. I must have been tweeting and wasn't paying attention. So that's my bad. Thank you all. It's good to join you all today.
Nice to have you with us.
Now, I also didn't tell my other joke that I told that joke, but the one I didn't tell was that, in 2019, I actually became the oldest currently serving constitutional officer in Kentucky by 10 years. Really, the closest one to me is Secretary of State Michael Adams. He's 45. I'll be 55 in October. And so the other day, as you can imagine, I was feeling a little down being the old dude in the state. But I was looking in the mirror, and my lovely bride of 30 years walks by, and I look in the mirror, and I look at her, and I look in the mirror, and I look at her, and I say, honey, I look so old. I look so tired. Can you tell me one good thing about myself? Try to uplift me. And she thought, and she looked, and she thought, and she looked. And finally she said, well, at least your eyesight's still good. So if you're going to be, she didn't actually say that, but if you're going to be auditor, I guess the best thing to do is have, good eyesight. And I want to thank SFOF to, allow me to meet other treasurers from the state, but also other auditors. It's so interesting to me to see the variance. I had an opportunity a few years ago to talk to JB McCuskey and the West Virginia auditor. And it was really surprising to us because he came in, he was talking about all the stuff that they did, including having prosecutorial power. And I was like, we don't have prosecutorial power. Our job is to find the data, confirm the data, and report the data.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been doing.
His office also acts as the securities commissioner for the state. It's just so interesting to see how the state statutes vary from state to state and the responsibilities of the offices. And if you're a real big nerd, you can follow the history of how some of the reasons why those offices were able to attract some of those duties and responsibilities. It is fascinating. But one of the bigger conversations, Auditor, that you and I spoke about that we wanted to talk about today, many of the states have been wrestling with I think in a misguided effort to create some additional efficiencies, they've, talked about combining state offices, and eliminating some, and, combining the treasurer and the auditor together, or creating, an executive agency post that does it. And I know, we've talked about, I think there's about 24 states that elect their state auditor still. And I think that there's this kind of reemergence where savvy legislators are starting to see the problem with the only audit function of the state come from the legislative branch of government. It's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house, right? And so why don't we talk a little bit about that? And just, from your perspective, I'm just curious, like, if you were going to talk to a legislator from a state that doesn't have a state auditor, how would you sell the position and help, talk about the how vital it is to make sure that accountability and transparency is there?
Well, I think it's always important to have that independence, either way that you look, and I have jokingly said, we are an independent, even though we're technically part of what would be considered the executive branch, we are still independent because we are elected. Now, I jokingly say we're really interdependent because, our budgets are submitted by the governor and approved or, passed by the General Assembly. I've jokingly always said, we're kind of like, if you remember Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Hermie, who wanted to be a dentist, was going to be independent, and Rudolph wanted to be independent. And they said, well, let's be independent together. So that's kind of the way that we are, in the auditor's office. We have to be independent together because they deal with our budgets. But I think that's very important. There's a lot of things. The very first thing that I did when I entered the auditor's office in 2015, I told all our auditors, we're not going to target anyone. We're not going to give anybody a pass. We're just simply going to follow the data. And I think that's so important. Even though I'm elected as a partisan, when I walk into the auditor's office, I think it's important to take that the partisan hat off, put on the independent, nonpartisan hat, and get to work. And anytime that you're going to have, whether it's in the case like maybe a governor, even though he's part of the executive branch too, or the top of the executive branch, try to have undue influence on the auditor, or if you're going to have from a standpoint of the General Assembly. Now, I'll tell you this, as an auditor, and I say this jokingly, but there's some truth to it. As an auditor, you don't really make a lot of friends. But there was a coach one time said, if you want friends, get a dog. So I do have a dog. We do have that part of it covered. But it's important to have that independent eye that's looking at it to hold people accountable. And to be honest with you, most people, and I do sincerely, most people want to do the right thing. There's a lot of laws on the books, and they're important laws. And when we audit them, so in the auditor office, we kind of act more like the guardrails, to help people stay in there. Now, there are obviously individuals that are trying to be fraudulent. We try to find as many of those as well. A lot of times we'll talk about the fraud triangle in auditors. You may have the most honest individual possible when you put them in a position, but you don't provide them with any oversight. And if you have a situation where, for whatever reason, they have some bills that overwhelm them, and that you say, whether it's gambling or drugs or a child sick or whatever, just pick any of the numerous, and that pressure comes in. If you don't have the oversight, you don't have the pressure, then eventually that rationale can come in, that, they're not really paying me what I'm worth or whatever. And then sometimes they will succumb. Even the most honest person will succumb to that temptation. So it's just important to have that independent eye that doesn't have undue influence on the auditor and the person that's doing that oversight.
That's great. You have to say it like this, though. I'm independent.
Independent. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, we're going to open it up for some questions, Auditor, unless you have anything else you want to add before we do that.
No, we can open questions. I have plenty of stuff. That's one thing. We're not short on information or data that we can share. I was just trying to make sure we cover as much, but love to answer any questions that somebody might have.
I got one question here in my text. I'm going to try to decipher it. Okay, so the question I think is, does your office, when you perform audits, are you looking at only dollars and cents, Or are you also looking to make sure statutes are being followed from a statutory audit perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from a statutory standpoint, we're looking at, especially if we're doing a financial statement audit, we're doing anything from, we're looking to make sure that the dollars and cents add up, but we're also looking at controls. We're also, looking if something looks odd, we're looking for statutory compliance, both with, DLG is generally the regulatory body, like for our counties. So we're looking to make sure that they comply with the guidance on that. So there's multiple things. Now, like our special exams, we can find fraud in a financial statement audit, and we have. But your special exams are the ones we can get a little bit broader, dig a little bit more detail, and have more of a policy, not necessarily a policy, but more of a discussion in that regards, looking for fraud, waste, fraud, and abuse. So
just to add also, Derek, the boss, the auditor, kind of mentioned this earlier, but part of what we do on our single audit work is specifically looking at federal program compliance. So specifically looking at federal statutory compliance. And, obviously with the amount of CARES funds and ARPA funds that have come in, we'll be doing more of that single audit and compliance work, not just at the state level, but also at the local level, because the vast majority of counties in Kentucky will meet the threshold in federal law of $750,000 in federal spending in a year because of that COVID related funding. So whereas normally not nearly all the counties meet that threshold, over the next couple of years, they're all essentially going to. So they're all going to have more of a look at that, in addition to the normal look that we would do as part of our state audit. So just wanted to touch on that, but as he said, that's definitely part of what we look at.
And something completely separate that I didn't really touch on, but a lot of people don't realize that we actually invoice for our audits. About 2/3 of our budget actually come from charging for the audit. So part of the legislation we've worked on over the years is try to find ways to help save counties money on those legislative audits. For instance, we 2018 did Senate Bill 144, or worked with the General Assembly to get Senate Bill 144 passed, where if you had on your financial statement audit or your fee audit, if you had a clean audit the year before, you could apply for what we call an AUP, an agreed upon procedure. And we're finding, depending on whether that's a county clerk or a sheriff, we can't do it for the counties, but a county clerk or a sheriff, for savings run anywhere from 65 to 70% on the cost of their audit. So anything that we can do to help them save money as well, we've tried to work diligently on that.
Yeah. I don't know what's worse, being audited or having to write the check to pay for it.
Right.
Okay, we have another question here, Auditor. Were you an auditor at any time in your prior life? Do you feel someone needs that experience to become auditor, or perhaps is it better not to have that auditing experience so you come in with a very fresh perspective?
Well, I did come in with a fresh perspective. I did have 13 years in the Kentucky General Assembly, so I did have an understanding. I've never been an auditor per se. Obviously, you mentioned my background. I graduated with a triple major in math, statistics, and theater. And I do jokingly say that way I know the math, I know the stats, and when I don't know, I just act like I know. So in politics, it worked well. But I mean, from a standpoint, I think it's good from an auditing standpoint to come in with those fresh ideas. Now, obviously, my assistant state auditor, she has to be a CPA to sign off on them in addition to my signature. But it's good to bring that fresh perspective. But I've relied heavily on our auditing branch, and I kind of hit the ground running and learned very quickly, and even had some of our managers early on saying, "Boy, you learn very quickly." So it's important, but at the same time, you rely on the people. When you put good people in place, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know. I think the previous auditor may have had an ag degree, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong on that, but I believe he had an ag degree. So it's not a requirement. Certainly it might help an individual, but it's not a requirement.
Sure. I think we have a question from Greg Mullins with JP Morgan.
Oh, fantastic.
Hey, Mr. Harmon. It's good to see you, and thanks for joining this morning.
Thank you for having me.
I actually have a two-part question. So first of all, you shared the story on the front end of the conversation about being approached by someone at the Capitol to request a special exam. And I'm sure you get quite a few of those requests, and given the limitations of resources, how does your office make a decision to pursue those special exam situations?
Sure.
And then the
With-
second question centers around, I'm really curious about the theater major, so I want to learn more about that. So,
Okay. All right. Well, on the first one, obviously we have a tips line, auditor.ky.gov, 1-800-KY-ALERT, that we have tips come in. We review some of those. We have, if a legislator approaches us, we will weigh that as well. Sometimes administrations, gubernatorial administrations or secretaries, cabinets request. And we try those type of requests. If we have the staffing and the ability, then we try to accommodate if at all possible. Certainly we can't do everything, but that's kind of, we weigh those pros and cons, and we weigh, because there are some people that would want you to audit everything, and if we had the people, I guess we could do that. But that's part of being part of an audit is picking a sample space, not looking at every single thing. So it is difficult. Now for the theater major, I guess I always had struggle between the logical and the creative side. And to be honest with you, I was going to be this big, huge actor. And, but I also love the math as well. And I always did really well in it. And I actually did a few, I don't know what we call it. I did some outdoor theater, the Legend of Daniel Boone and Lincoln. And then I also did a little bit of extra work and some things, but nothing major. But it was just good as that logical and the creative side. I always, matter of fact, the 4 years in college, my work study, of course I did work study, was in the theater department. So
Was it just theater or was it musical theater?
well, I am much better at acting, not singing. If you want to end this thing very quickly, just have me sing. So now I will say that when I was in college, I drove down to Springfield, was about an hour away. I did character voices and things. And so I would drive down to this radio. Well, it was actually an ad agency. I don't think it's there anymore. And they would pay me $10 a spot to record these character voices and things like that. And they'd have them all lined out. I could knock them out really quick. So I'd make like $150 in about an hour. And, back in the 80s, I mean, it's probably good now, but back in the 80s, $150 for an hour to drive an hour down, do an hour back. That's pretty good money for a college student. So
Nice. Well, we know if we need any voiceover work done, we know where to call.
Exactly.
Great. That's great.
Hey, Auditor Harmon, can I add
Yes.
a little backstory to Mr. Mullins' question about that legislator request?
Yes.
So that legislator, that agency did all of the basic training for every law enforcement officer in the state, except for 3 departments, and then like 40 hours of in-service training. It's a big logistical lift. He had a request not just from the legislator, but from the cabinet that housed that agency. And I was the deputy secretary there.
Yes.
One of the things, and we invited them in, asked them to come in so we could get a reset for that agency. One of the little pieces of karma or backstory there is I had to go do double duty as the commissioner while Auditor Harmon was busy doing his audit. And everything he says about how they do their audits, follow the data, no targeting. I saw that firsthand. It's well done. But it was more than just a delay. It was a big lift. Well done. Kentucky's a much better place for it. But that's one of the places where our lives previously intersected.
Yes.
That's great. Any other questions for the auditor?
Hey, Mike, I was going to ask a quick question. I don't remember any other Kentucky auditors having a strong legislative package, and you've had a strong legislative package pretty much every year. Do you want to weigh in on that, why it's important for the auditor to be aggressive in that area? And I know that you've crafted your staff to be helpful in that. You've got Sarah Beth, who was in the House and the Senate, of course, yourself. I just would be curious for you to weigh in on that, because like I said, I don't remember any of the other Kentucky auditors being so aggressive in that area.
Well, for one thing, our earlier conversation, making sure we don't get legislated out because it's an important position. But no, I think it's very good to be active in that regards, just from the standpoint, like I said, we've had 11, 12 pieces of legislation. Most of them very much help us be efficient, effective, ethical. One of them, I didn't talk about our area development districts, but there was, some concern. The legislators wanted, the auditor's office to audit all I think there's like 15 of those area development districts every year, and we wouldn't have had the staffing to do that. But also, it's not necessary because they get those CPA audits. But it is important for us to have a little more oversight. So it was interesting, especially in that particular one, where we got buy-in from the General Assembly. We actually got buy-in for the ads to let the auditor have a little more oversight and review their audit work. And now we've got them on a uniform reporting standard as well to make it easier, from the standpoint of being able to compare different districts as well. And that gives us the first right of refusal as well to do their audits, and we review their work papers. So it's always important to be engaged, and it's good to have that background. I think the previous auditor in 4 years may have advanced like 2 pieces of legislation. Like I said, in 5.5, we've done about 12 pieces. And it's not necessarily to have the marks, or the notches on the belt, how many pieces you have, but it's just important to stay engaged. Because, if someone all of a sudden decides, like, as I said earlier, I said it jokingly, but if someone wanted to decide to eliminate the auditor's office, I think that would be a detriment to the state, just like it would be a detriment when we talk about eliminating the treasurer. That's important to have those watchdogs there to be able to monitor the money coming in and going out.
Great points. Anybody else? I want to thank all of you for coming on today. I see Treasurer Meyer from Wyoming. Thanks, Treasurer, for jumping on here today. And Treasurer Hayter, both of you, Wyoming, South Dakota, we need to get you guys scheduled in a future Fiscal Focus so we can get to know you more.
Like I would just say about the Kentucky auditor there, having statistical advantage and acting advantage, he's probably one heck of a poker player.
Yes, yeah, he probably is, but not a card counter, right, Mike?
Not a card counter.
No.
He's not much of a gambler.
I'm not much. That is true. That is true.
Well, just a reminder again, if you haven't already registered for the Salt Lake City National Meeting, July 27th through the 30th, we're really looking forward to being together in person for that event. State officers, treasurers, auditors, and senior staffers that are coming, you want to make sure that you arrive in plenty of time on that Tuesday, the 27th. For the welcome event. It is going to be held at a local ski resort. It's going to be a really beautiful evening and dinner up on a mountain. So make sure you get there in time for that. If you have any questions with your room or airfare or anything like that, you can reach out to Melanie at SFOF.com, and she would be happy to answer any questions that you have. Corporate partners, if you are planning on coming and you've not gotten your hotel room yet, you probably don't have a room at the main hotel at this point, but you can certainly try. I think the block is full or about 98% as of the other day, which is great. There's just going to be a huge number of legislators from all 50 states. We have almost 20 state treasurers and state auditors that are going to be in attendance. It's going to be a really, really great time together. So I'm really looking forward to that. I want to thank Auditor Harmon again for all of your work. It's been great to get to know you and Sarah Beth, of course, who comes to our meetings. And thanks for all the rest of the staff in the auditor's office. We know that a lot of times you are the unsung heroes that are putting in the long hours and doing it for a lot less than you could earn in the private sector. So thank you for your service to the Commonwealth. And so we just appreciate everybody. Yeah.
And Derek, I just want to say I'm looking forward to Salt Lake City. For 10 years when I was in the General Assembly, I served as state co-chair for ALEC. So I'm looking very forward to that.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm sure they'll be looking forward to seeing you too then. There's several alums that'll be there that are now state treasurers or state auditors. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, but we will conclude this time and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.